This happened to me when I first moved to this city. It was a new beginning for me. I had left Missouri behind and had settled in a neighborhood that seemed quite nice. One day, I was looking for a place to live with a friend, and we found this cool apartment that met all the requirements I was looking for. The first impression I had was that the people in my building seemed great, so I didn't even think about it and decided to move in almost instantly. My friend thought it was a great choice too, so I didn't need any more. My parents were thousands of miles away, so I was on my own in an environment full of strangers. But I'm an outgoing girl, so I had no trouble connecting with people. Whenever someone spoke to me, I smiled and joked, and I quickly endeared myself to people, so I never thought it would get me into trouble. However, one day, as I was walking up the stairs, I ran into my green-haired neighbor. "Good morning, I'm Ania. You must be Ronald, right?" I said in a friendly way. "Yes, and you're quite the bombshell, Ania. It's nice to meet you," he said to me in a tone somewhere between flirtatious and disturbing. "Have a nice day," I added, trying to keep the conversation light. When I mentioned that I lived next door to him, he winked at me in a way that left me uncomfortable. He was the same age as my uncle, and his look made me feel like I was a piece of meat instead of a person. After that strange and otherwise uncomfortable interaction, I decided to unplug for a bit. I was at work for the rest of the day, but I couldn't concentrate. That piercing gaze and strange smile kept hanging around in my head like a bad joke. To distract myself, I decided to go out with some colleagues to have a drink and hang out. When I finally got home around midnight, I had had a couple of drinks too many and stood outside my apartment door, looking for my keys in my backpack. At that moment, I heard the door to the apartment behind me open, and my heart immediately skipped a beat. A mixture of nerves and discomfort came over me, but I tried to ignore the feeling. Suddenly, I turned around and saw Ronald standing there, just a few steps away from me, smiling in the same haunting way he did when I met him earlier. At that moment, a new wave of discomfort swept over me. "Hey, Ania," he said, moving too close to me. His personal distance was practically non-existent. He was almost on top of me. I felt trapped and wondered if my initial instinct about him had been correct. I stepped to the side, trying to regain my personal space, but without being abrupt. "Do you need anything?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant, but inside, panic was beginning to settle into my being. There was something about this guy that I didn't like at all, and the conversation that had been so easy before now felt like a very tense tightrope. I got no response, and I didn't hear a sound either, which scared me even more when I saw that guy standing so close to me. However, I swallowed my fear and tried to act strong, ignoring his presence as if it didn't matter. Then he asked me, "Do you need anything yourself? You look a little messed up right now." He blurted out again with that creepy tone, and even though I wasn't looking at him, I could feel his gaze drilling into my face, and all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. No, I was just looking for my keys," I replied quickly, trying to stay calm. "Look, if you want, you can spend the night with me. You're not going to need your keys for that," he told me with all the sass in the world, and his smile widened in a way that chilled my blood. "No thanks," I blurted out, trying to act natural, but feeling my heart like an African drum inside my chest. Definitely being around this man made me sick, but I really didn't want to be rude or confront him in an aggressive way or anything like that. Looking back, I think that's always been my biggest problem. I'm a very friendly girl who has a hard time confronting people, and so I tend to have a hard time setting boundaries. I finally found my keys and rushed to open the door, but before I could get in, Ronald grabbed my hand and came up to my ear. "The sooner you start liking me, the better it will be for you, hottie. Good night." Then he let go of my hand and left, slamming the door as he entered his apartment. I froze, shaking inside. His words left me so shocked that for a long time I couldn't move, as if I was made of stone. That night I couldn't sleep at all. That terrifying encounter had my nerves on edge. I kept asking myself if I should go to the police, but of course, I thought, who would arrest him for that? My other option was to go to the owner of the building and tell him about the situation, but that would certainly poison the atmosphere even more. I decided I'd better keep quiet about it and try to avoid him. Every time I saw him on the stairs, he would throw me a sinister smile, so I started to circle around every time I had to leave or enter the building and looked everywhere, making sure he wasn't around, like someone avoiding a plague. But the worst was about to happen. One Friday night, I was sweating my butt off at home working out, while blasting music at full volume. Outside, the rain was pouring down and thunder was rumbling, so I was in full action when suddenly a bolt of lightning lit up the whole place. My eyes were immediately fixed on the huge window in my living room overlooking the balcony, and then I froze. There it was, a horribly distorted face pressed against the glass, staring back at me as I exercised. "Oh my God, what the hell are you doing there?" I said. But before I could react, Ronald flung open the window. "Come on, there's no reason to walk away. We're friends, remember?" I started shaking uncontrollably, a product of the nerves and fear I felt. "We're not friends! Get the hell out of here!" I shouted, backing away as he peeked out. Then, another bolt of lightning illuminated the room, and bang, the light went out. I have no words to describe how terrified I felt at that moment. I don't even know how I didn't faint on the spot, because my heart felt like a boiling cauldron, and I swear I couldn't feel my limbs. At that moment, a strange blue light filled my apartment, and I saw Ronald watching me like a predator watching his prey. This man was a total sicko, and now he was less than 6 feet away from me in the middle of the dark, and I felt like I was about to have a seizure. Seeing me so terrified, Ronald just laughed like a maniac, then licked his lips, and what he said to me next chilled my bones. "How about we do exercises together? I know some that will be wonderful for you." "Help!" I screamed at the top of my lungs and ran for the door, but he followed me like a wolf after his prey and grabbed me by the hair, making me fall backwards to the floor. "Enough of your nonsense, hottie. I've tried to be nice to you, but apparently you prefer it the hard way. No one rejects me, Ania. No one. You're going to regret ignoring me." Ronald grabbed me by the hair again and dragged me into the room, locking the door behind me. I screamed again, but then I felt something cold and sharp on my neck. It was a knife. "One more scream and I'll slice your neck, Bonbon. I'm not playing. I've done it before, so it will be better for you if you cooperate." I was paralyzed and speechless, of course. Ronald pushed me to the ground hard, which made the back of my head hit the floor, causing me a lot of pain. "Did you think I was kidding? You're stupider than I thought. Now you'll see what happens when you ignore Ronald. I'm going to clip your pretty wings and hang them out in the sun to dry." Honestly, I don't know what exactly those words meant, but they sounded like something horrible. "Please, Ronald, you don't have to do this. We can be friends, really," I pleaded, feeling my stomach cringe. "Oh, now you really want to be my friend. Do you really think I was born yesterday?" he retorted, as I panicked to death. I could already see the deadly fate that awaited me at the hands of this psychopath. But no, I wasn't going to let him beat me just like that. I decided that no matter what, I wasn't going down without a fight. I would not be a damsel in distress. It was time to become a warrior and save myself, so I stood up slowly, trying hard not to show fear. Then, I let my hair down, took off my jacket, and looked at him with a confidence I didn't feel at all. "I'm sorry, Ronald. I should never have treated you the way I did. I should have paid attention to you from the beginning." He stared at me as if mesmerized, skeptical, of course, but now I had his attention. "Okay, I'm ready to be your hottie," I told him. "But please don't be mad at me." I tried to calm him down. "Look, why don't we move over to the bed and do something fun? What do you say?" I said, trying to contain the disgust I felt just imagining it. "Okay, you seem to be getting the hang of things," he said with a smile that made me gag. I sat up fully and started walking towards my bed, knowing that my phone was there, and that I just needed a moment to grab it and lock myself in the bathroom before Ronald could do something crazy. I was really scared, because if anything went wrong and he caught me, I was dead. He said himself he had done it before, so I was gambling my life here. When we got to the bed, I pushed Ronald down making him fall backwards, and then I leaned over him and kissed him. Yes, I did, and I still have nightmares about it, but it was necessary to make him believe me, and especially to get him to let his guard down. But at that very moment, I lunged for my phone, which was a few inches above his head, but he was more cunning than I thought. With overwhelming force, he grabbed my arm and twisted it, making me scream in pain. Don't try to act sly, hottie. I told you you're not the first girl to try it, and I warned you that it wasn't going to end well for you, he said as he glared at me in an angry, maniacal way. But at that moment, something in his voice awakened the fighter in me. He lunged towards me, trying to pin me against the mattress, but I managed to move faster than him, grabbing the lamp from the bedside table, and without a second's hesitation, I smashed it against his ugly face several times, making him stagger backwards as blood spurted from his face. "Now I'll kill you, you devil witch!" he screamed, falling to the ground and writhing in pain. At that instant, I knew that this was my only chance to get out of there alive. So I ran for the door as fast as my legs would carry me, grabbing the keys that were on the tea table in the living room, and once I was outside, I locked the door, leaving Ronald trapped in my apartment. As he screamed and banged on the door, I dialed the police. Thankfully, the door held enough to keep him out, but when the officers finally arrived, he was no longer in my apartment. Somehow he had escaped over the balcony. However, he was caught almost immediately, thanks to the wounds I gave him with the lamp, because the idiot went to the hospital. Ronald was put behind bars for what he did to me, but soon after, I heard that 3 girls showed up at the station with serious accusations against him. One of them now needed crutches to get around. My blood ran cold as I remembered the horrible threat he made to me that night. And they, the ones who made the accusations, had been tenants in my same apartment. 2 moved out to avoid more trouble, and the one who dared to report it ended up on crutches. It is sad to see how many women, due to fear and shame, prefer not to report their aggressors, giving these guys a second chance to continue doing harm. Now Ronald is in prison, and I enjoy living in my apartment peacefully. Our landlord had to face charges for having a criminal under his roof. It's amazing how, despite complaints about him, he did nothing while this guy assaulted 4 girls, leaving them completely mangled, and me with a broken arm. I just hope he rots in jail forever. It all started a few years ago when my new neighbors moved in next door, and things got real ugly real fast. Turns out these were super loud, and since I have a work-from-home job, the constant noise was driving me crazy. Their kids were screaming, running around and rolling things around until late, and it was making it impossible for me to sleep. Plus, their dogs wouldn't stop barking all day and night in the yard. Poor things. Most of the time they were in a cage, so I couldn't put all the blame on them, even though they were getting on my nerves. These people lived as they pleased and didn't seem to care at all about others. And since I'm not one to confront people, I just tried to put up with the noise and adjust somehow, but it was really impossible. This went on for a couple of months, until one night I heard a fight outside. It sounded pretty serious, so I checked it out. My neighbors were a young couple with 2 kids about 7 and 5. I had barely spoken to them since they moved in. We just exchanged greetings and nothing else. The guy had a blue van that he used for work, and when I heard the argument, he was in front of his van having a loud crossword with an older man. A few days went by, and I noticed that his blue van, which was always parked in front of his house, was gone, and I didn't hear the dogs barking either. There was no more crying from the children late at night, and all the chaos seemed to have vanished. To tell the truth, I felt very relieved, grateful for the peace I had again. I thought maybe they had gone on vacation or something, but weeks went by and the noise didn't return. The house next door was still quiet, with no movement or sounds at all. And although everything was quiet, it seemed strange to me that the front windows remained open for days. I began to think that maybe they had suddenly left for some reason. With me being home all the time, I was very attentive, but I never saw their van or a moving truck. Something seemed a bit odd to me. Eventually, I started hearing strange noises inside the house. I live in a duplex, so my house is attached to his, and since it's an old building, the walls are pretty thin. One night, as I was trying to sleep, I heard a strange noise that sounded like scratching coming from my built-in closet, which is right on the wall that connects to the neighbor's house. I lay there, listening to the noise for a few seconds, and suddenly started to worry, thinking there might be a mouse or something. So I sat up in bed and turned on the lamp on the bedside table to get a better look. I got up with a mixture of nervousness, curiosity, and disgust, and went straight to the closet. My heart was racing because, honestly, I can't stand the thought of having critters lurking in my house, so I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and started inspecting. I checked every nook and cranny of the closet, but there was nothing weird in there. "Thank God," I said. I felt a momentary relief, but as if the universe was mocking me, that nagging noise sounded again. I jumped back from the closet door, almost dropping the phone. Fright quickened my pulse as I frantically shone the light inside, the light reflecting off the empty space of the closet. The sound echoed in my ears, intensifying with every second, coming from behind the wall, as if something with hooves was trying to get out. I covered my mouth with my hand to keep from screaming because it was really freaking me out. I couldn't believe it. It didn't sound like a mouse, it was too loud. Panic started to set in as I wondered what the hell was going on next door, and suddenly, the noise stopped. I stood there, holding my breath for about 2 minutes, waiting for it to sound again, but nothing. That night, I slept on the couch because I was too scared to hear that eerie scratching in my room again. In the following days, I kept hearing strange noises coming from the house next door, but not the usual ones, but that kind. Scratching, rustling, banging. It seemed like the sounds were moving all over their house, and sometimes it was hard to tell where exactly they were coming from. Luckily, that scratching sound in the closet never came again, but all these other strange sounds did, which was still unsettling. I started to think that maybe the neighbors came back from time to time to take their stuff out, but I still didn't see them, and their kids and dogs were still in silent mode. From my window at the back of my house, I could see their yard, and that seemed strange to me, because the dog cages were still there, in place. I mention this because one day while I was working, I heard a strange rustling sound from the back of his house. At that point, I stopped what I was doing and just paid attention to that spot, because if I left the windows open, I often heard the dogs moving around in their cages, and the rustling was quite noticeable. I hurried upstairs and looked out my bedroom window, but the cages were still empty, and that gave me the creeps. It was one more in the long list of strange things I had been hearing in that place. But without a doubt, the scariest thing happened a few weeks later, for on that occasion I saw something tangible. I had just returned from the supermarket with my bags and noticed that my neighbor's front door was slightly open. I stared at it for a few seconds, and for an instant thought that one of them might appear, but the house was still silent. Motivated by the strangeness of the situation and the uneasiness I had been feeling for weeks, I put my groceries back in the house, and when I put the last bag away in the kitchen, I closed the front door. But curiosity was gnawing at me, so I decided to leave, walked down the driveway, and slowly approached my neighbor's door. In those few minutes it took me to carry the bags inside, I felt that something strange was about to happen, and I wasn't wrong. The door to my neighbor's house had opened even wider, and I could now see inside a little, but what I saw almost startled me. The door was ajar, so I could see into the hallway. There were children's shoes and toys lying all over the floor to the left. A light was on, and I thought it was the kitchen at the end of the hallway, so I spoke up. "Hello?" I said with a knot in my stomach, and pushed the door a little further. At that moment, an icy breeze blew me sideways, and I stepped back feeling scared. Suddenly the kitchen door opened and I saw a dark figure standing there. It wasn't a person. It was like a completely black silhouette, but it wasn't a shadow. It was too dense, like a dark mass. It was there, standing facing me. In that instant, panic swept over every cell of my body and I ran out of there at full speed. It wasn't until I was back in my house with the door closed behind me that I began to calm down a bit. I collapsed on the floor trying to control my breathing as all sorts of chaotic thoughts filled my mind. What you should know about me is that I love horror stories, but I get really scared when something weird happens in my own space. So I was just sitting there, my heart pounding in my throat and trying to calm down. That's when I heard 3 clear knocks on the front door. I froze, not daring to move for a minute. Then there was another knock, but then nothing more. I opened the door and looked out, but no one was there, as I had anticipated. Even today, I have no idea what happened to my neighbors, and the people on the street have no clues either. They just disappeared out of nowhere. I haven't seen that dark figure since that day, although I still hear strange noises. I just hope that whatever is in that house stays inside and never comes out. A few weeks ago, I moved into a new neighborhood that seemed quiet, with friendly neighbors, something I was really looking for. I wanted peace and quiet, but something that happened a while ago has made me think about moving again. It all started when I was taking things out of my car, and my next-door neighbor came over to introduce himself. He was a tall, thin guy. His facial features were very pronounced, making his face look square and angular. He also had very deep, dark circles under his eyes. His brown hair already had some gray in it, and a white streak running through it. Although he seemed friendly, I couldn't help but feel a little uncomfortable. "Hello, neighbor. I see you're new around here, Alfred, aren't you?" he asked. "Yes. How did you know?" I replied, a little surprised. "Oh, I'm part of the homeowners board and we always comment on new neighbors." "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said as he pointed to his house. "I live right over there." I guess the concern showed on my face because he started talking again. "Oh, sorry about the boarded up windows. I know they don't look very welcoming, but I'm doing some repairs." "Don't worry, I totally understand," I said, although deep down I wasn't so sure. We chatted some more and eventually he invited me over for dinner. He claimed that he always invites new neighbors to his house as a sort of welcoming courtesy. I accepted the invitation out of politeness, but still felt a little nervous because I really didn't know this man well and had no idea what to expect. But he had already accepted, so I had no choice but to attend. When I finished getting my things out of my car, I looked over at his house and a strange feeling ran through my body. He sat on his porch watching me as I worked. We made eye contact for a moment and he smiled broadly, appearing to be very friendly, but there was something in his gaze that made me uncomfortable. I don't know if it was his intensity or the fact that he was so interested in me. Maybe I was being paranoid if right, but I couldn't help but have that I don't know what that said I shouldn't trust him. I decided to go to his house for dinner. After all, I was part of the homeowners association board and I wanted to make a good impression. When I arrived, he greeted me with a smile and took me into his living room, which was decorated in a weird way, all in dark tones and a half macabre style. The windows were covered and lit only by a few candles on the coffee table. This really caught my attention, because it was the most unusual decorative style I had ever seen in my life. The house looked more like a funeral home than someone's home, but who was I to judge someone else's tastes? Who knows? Maybe it's half Gothic, I thought to myself, trying to downplay how disturbing it all looked. He offered me a place on the couch and went to the kitchen to prepare dinner. Meanwhile, I was feeling increasingly uncomfortable. I could hear noises in the kitchen, and for a moment I thought about approaching him and offering to help him with whatever he was preparing, but I decided to wait patiently on the couch. Finally, he returned with a plate full of cheeses and crackers, set it down in front of me, and sat down facing me. "I hope you like it. The chicken will be ready soon. Until then, here are some snacks," he said as I began to eat. However, after a few minutes, I started to feel a little dizzy, and my eyes were heavy. "What's going on?" was my last thought before everything went dark. I woke up a little later, very groggy and trying to get my bearings. The brick ceiling prevented me from seeing well in the dark, but I managed to make out the figure of my neighbor, smiling in a strange way as he watched me. "Let's play a game," he said before I could even react or understand what was going on. "What are you doing? Let me go," I shouted in terror. "I'll let you go, Alfred, but first, you need to escape," he replied, widening that sinister smile. "Hey, don't look at me like that. Just so you can see I'm a good guy, I'll give you a 3-minute head start," he told me in an almost friendly tone, grinning from ear to ear, like someone with a hidden agenda. I wanted to throw him to the ground and confront him and punch that stupid, cynical smile off his face. But I saw that he had a metal bat in his hand and decided that it wasn't the best idea. Besides, I wasn't in my best condition at that moment. Instead, I took him at his word and started running. I was a little dizzy and dazed, but I managed to make my way to the stairs. I started staggering down the stairs, counting the steps. 1, 2, 3, and I felt a shiver as I heard him counting too. I had to get out of that house any way I could, so I threw myself against the front door, but it wouldn't open. It was locked, and the windows were still sealed. "Damn it," I said in desperation. I started looking for another exit while listening to his voice. 2 minutes and 46, 2 minutes and 47, 2 minutes and 48. I was frozen with fear. I didn't know what would happen when that countdown was over. At that moment, I heard his footsteps approaching. I knew he was done counting, but my brain finally kicked in, and I decided to act. I saw him coming down the stairs very fast, and as he reached the end, he grabbed the bat tightly and ran towards me with a maniacal grin on his face. My eyes widened in terror, but I managed to dodge the first blow, albeit narrowly. Without a second thought, I started up the stairs again, dodging every aisle I encountered in my path. "Alfred, come out! I know where you're hiding," I yelled as I heard him behind me. I entered a door that was at the end of the hallway and stepped into an empty room. Suddenly, I saw a window through which I could escape. The problem was that I was on a second floor, but when I looked behind me and saw that psychopath approaching swinging the bat ready to hit me, I jumped out the window without thinking. I had no other choice. When I fell, I was shocked. I was on another roof. It looked like this one had another porch in the back, and the worst part was that I had sprained my ankle. "I'll be damned," I shouted, feeling frustrated and desperate. At that moment, I heard him guffaw as I jumped out the window. He was holding the bat over his shoulder with one hand as he approached me. I thought about yelling for help now that I was outside, but my neighbor anticipated my intention, and then I saw him reach his free hand into the back of his pants and pull out a gun. He pointed it straight at my face, and dropping the bat, he motioned for me to be quiet, putting his finger over his lips. I was paralyzed. I stood like a statue waiting for the coup de grace. But when I felt that all was lost, something happened that I would not have expected. Stuart, which is the name of my neighbor, slipped when he stepped on a loose tile, dropping the gun and rolling until he fell to the ground. As best I could, I crawled to the edge of the roof, and when I looked down, Stuart was unconscious with one of his legs in a strange position, clearly broken, and a small pool of blood was forming under his head. I didn't know if he was dead or not, and honestly, I didn't care either. I just wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. So as best I could, I stood up and climbed back to the window, then went downstairs and with the help of an armchair managed to break one of the windows and escape that way. The first thing I did when I got home was to call the police. I had foolishly left my cell phone at home. About 15 minutes later, the patrol cars were in front of my neighbor's house, but to everyone's surprise, they didn't find him there. He had vanished. The pool of blood was right where he fell, and there were marks indicating that he had crawled somewhere along the fence, but there his trail vanished. As crazy as it sounds, the police were unable to find him. Fortunately, I managed to recover from my ankle injury fairly quickly, thanks to the medical help I received. However, knowing that Stuart is still alive and out there somewhere has kept me in constant paranoia, so I am seriously considering moving away from this place to another city if possible, as far away as I can, where I can be sure that I will never meet this madman again. Over 10 years ago, my parents and I moved into a duplex. It wasn't the perfect place for a family, but it was what we could afford after the housing crisis. I was too little to understand it back then, but most of our new neighbors seemed like nice people. Just the weekend after we moved in, several of them came over to have a sort of party to give us the typical newcomer's welcome. It was already getting late when everyone arrived, and my parents told me it was time for me to go to bed, so I was sent to my room. My room shared a wall with the living room, where my parents and the others were chatting. Since I didn't have much choice, I decided to do a little eavesdropping and listen to what they were saying. From where I was, I could hear almost everything, although a lot of things escaped me. But what really caught my attention was when they started talking about our neighbor in the back. They said he was a nice guy before, but since his wife left him a few months ago, he had withdrawn into his own world, and it seemed like he just wanted to stay away from others. Some people said they were worried about him, but by that time we had moved in a week ago, and I hadn't seen him in all that time. What's behind those hedges? I wondered when I heard one of the neighbors say that apparently he had become obsessed with his garden. He and his wife used to plant everything, but now it was just him. I guess he still keeps up the tradition for some reason. The conversation about him gave me chills, because even though we had been there for a few days, we had never seen him. It was kind of unsettling, so I decided to stop playing the super secret spy by sticking my nose where it doesn't belong and try to get some sleep. What I didn't know then was that it would be one of the last nights I would have a full and peaceful sleep. A couple of nights later, while I was playing up and down stairs, I noticed that there was a window in the middle of the staircase overlooking the backyard. I stopped to look on our neighbor's side of the yard, which, to my surprise, was also visible from there. The neighbor had installed a tall fence separating our properties and had also planted a hedge about 10 feet behind the fence, which created a rather odd landscape, but made it almost impossible for us to see into his yard from ours. However, from where I was, I could see everything very clearly. My neighbor's yard was full of bushes and flowers that looked like something out of a fairy tale, and in the far corner was a greenhouse that I couldn't see through the glass because it was all covered with vines. But the place was really nice. The neighbors were right. The man spent a lot of time working his garden. As I was watching, I suddenly saw him. The neighbor came out of the greenhouse, and I could tell he was a bit disheveled and nervous. He looked around, as if checking to see if anyone was watching him, and then limped quickly into his house. His attitude struck me as rather odd, and for some reason my instinct told me he was up to something weird. My curiosity about this guy had been running high since we arrived, so I decided to do something about it that night. I waited until everyone was asleep and then slipped out of the house carefully. It was a full moon that night, so everything was clear, and even though I knew he was still inside, I decided to climb over the fence and drop behind the hedge. But as soon as I did, I realized I had made a big mistake. I was now trapped between the fence boards and the thorns of the thickest hedge I had ever seen in my life. But there was no turning back now. And to make matters worse, just at that moment, the neighbor came out the back door, and I was completely frozen as I watched him from the shadows. He returned to the greenhouse, and this time he looked totally different from how he had in the afternoon. He was now wearing a smart suit and was adjusting his tie as if trying to calm himself down. Suddenly, he opened the greenhouse door and stepped inside. This was definitely the weirdest thing I had ever seen in my life. Several minutes passed, during which time I could hear him mumbling and giggling like a kid at a sleepover. But in between the giggling and mumbling, I heard a metallic noise, something that sounded like chains moving, and a faint groan which didn't seem to be coming from him, but sounded like a female voice. This left me very intrigued. I didn't understand anything, but I knew something strange was going on in that greenhouse and I needed to find out. After a while, the guy came out again, but this time he was exhausted and covered in a dark liquid that, in the moonlight, couldn't be dirt. I wasn't sure, but it looked like blood. I was very shocked, frozen as I watched him slink back to his house to wash up. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I needed to know what was going on there. So, mustering all the courage I had, I crawled through the thorns of the hedge and approached the greenhouse. I took a good breath of air before opening the door and peeking out to see what was really there. But what I saw surpassed any grim expectations I had about what this man was doing that place. Towards the back of the greenhouse, I could see a very thin and emaciated middle-aged woman, half-naked and bound hand and foot with chains. She was lying on some kind of dirty tarpaulin on the floor, but this was not the most terrifying thing. This woman had her arms and legs lined with wounds like cuts made with a knife. Some of these cuts were healed, others were scabbed over, while other cuts were fresh and still bleeding. The image alone was surreal and extremely creepy. I stood completely paralyzed in the doorway, my heart racing and my whole body trembling. That was an almost ghostly image, but the woman was real and she looked very bad, as if she was about to die. But that was not all. The place smelled disgusting, like rotten meat, urine, and feces, It was really awful there. At one point, the woman and I made eye contact, and in an almost inaudible whisper, she said, "Help." At that instant, I came to my senses and realized the situation I was in. I immediately ran out and jumped over the huge fence to my house. Don't ask me how I did it, because to this day even I don't know how. All I know is that as I did it, I could hear the man running after me and yelling at me to stop. I arrived home a nervous wreck, waking my parents up screaming and telling them we had to call the police. When I told my parents what I had seen at the neighbor's house, they couldn't believe it, but because of my condition, they knew I wasn't lying. They immediately called the police, and it didn't take them 10 minutes to arrive. When they arrived at the neighbor's house, they found the same heartbreaking scene as I did, but there was no trace of the man. The neighbor had used the time to escape, but he didn't get too far, for he was arrested a few hours later hiding in a neighbor's shed. It seems that he slipped in there without telling her anything. It turned out that the woman in the greenhouse was none other than the wife of the guy, whose name I prefer to keep to myself. Obviously, she didn't actually leave him, she tried to, but he discovered her when she was trying to sneak out in the middle of the night, fed up with his mistreatment. This action infuriated him so much that he locked her in the greenhouse and kept her captive there for the last 2 months, torturing her and subjecting her to all kinds of abuse and twisted things, like cutting her every day with a razor blade and then drinking her blood. This man was a monster and completely insane. Fortunately, my neighbor's wife was taken to the hospital, and after a few weeks she recovered completely, at least from the physical wounds, because I am sure that the psychological and emotional wounds left on her by this monster will take much longer to heal. Oregon, maybe they never will. This man was sentenced to 25 years in prison for what he did to his wife, even though he tried to dodge his sentence by claiming mental illness, but he didn't get away with it. Hello everyone, my name is Rob. My girl and I live in a house in the middle of the woods, away from everything and everyone. Truth be told, people think that being away from the world is weird, but if you had a neighbor like Ethan, the psychopath we had to deal with, you'd understand that decision. Since we moved in, we got to know him in the least pleasant way possible. What? Well, we found out that he was spying on us from his house. Meanwhile, neighbors told us that Ethan had been causing terror all over the area. During the day, he would just look out the windows, but at night some claimed to have seen him trying to break into houses or even talking to the kids. Can you imagine that? I couldn't believe it. I thought the neighbors were exaggerating because in my previous neighborhood they also made my life miserable for no reason. However, in this case, the bad press was more than justified. Curious about everything they were saying about him, I decided to go talk to Ethan while my girlfriend took care of unpacking boxes. I made my way to his door and rang the bell, and almost immediately a strange-looking guy appeared. I tried to be friendly, but quickly realized I had made a big mistake by going all the way to his house. He didn't even return my greeting, and his gaze was so dark it looked like he was going to pounce on me. "Hi, I'm Rob," I stammered, in the friendliest tone I could, as that grim look drilled into my face, but to him it was like an annoying mosquito was buzzing at his door. So I soon decided that perhaps the prudent thing to do would be to keep my distance. Over the next few days, despite everything, Ethan kept showing up and stalking us, so we decided it would be best to install a new camera on the front door of the house, since the old one mysteriously stopped working. After settling in, I started to feel that something was not right. The camera seemed to be in a different location, and as I reviewed the footage, I was paralyzed to see that Ethan had been trying to break it. This infuriated me, but I let it go because I really didn't want to get in trouble with this guy. However, within a few days, history kept repeating itself, until one day, he just broke it, and that was the last straw. That time I was so furious that I decided to knock on the door of his house to complain, and to my surprise this time, the door opened by itself and there was no one behind it. Intrigued, I ventured out to explore that gloomy place that psychopath called home, but found no one. I saw many family photos, but not a single picture of Ethan. The lights were off, and I thought if I turned them on I might alert him. I didn't know what I expected to find there, but it was trespassing, and to be honest, I didn't care too much. Suddenly I heard noises coming from the basement, so I decided to go downstairs to see where they were coming from. I went down cautiously, but when I got there, what I saw almost made me fall down. On the floor there were at least 5 people chained naked and with only bandages covering their parts. They were connected like a centipede and had their mouths sealed with duct tape. It was absolutely repulsive and twisted. I remembered that movie, what was it called? The Human Centipede. I immediately tried to back away, but just as I wanted to escape, Ethan appeared behind me, grinning deviously and proud of his handiwork. "Isn't the movie beautiful?" he said. "It inspired me to do this. It's amazing what I can do, isn't it? Now all I'm missing is your girl, but since you're here," Ethan said, leaving the rest to my interpretation and enjoying his madness. At that moment, he pulled a taser gun out of his pocket and lunged at me. Somehow, though, the fact that he mentioned my girlfriend filled me with anger. It was as if something dark took hold of me, and instead of running away, before he could touch me with the gun, I kicked him in the chest with such force that I threw him about 10 feet away from me, causing him to drop the taser. It was then that I lunged at him and started hitting him with all my might. At first it was just defense, but soon I got carried away. Each blow was harder than the last, and the people chained on the ground looked at me in terror. I don't know how long I kept hitting him, but when I finally stopped, he was lying on the ground completely motionless, and his face was smashed in. Suddenly, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs and fear coursed through my body. Without thinking, I grabbed the gun I had taken from Ethan and prepared to fight again. The person who came down the stairs, however, was my girlfriend, who was completely horrified when she saw the scene in front of her. I immediately ran to where she was and hugged her. We called the police and started to untie the victims. When the police arrived, they couldn't believe their eyes. Ethan was pronounced dead at the scene due to the blunt force trauma I inflicted on him from the beating. Fortunately, the 5 people this sick man was holding hostage in his basement in inhumane conditions told the officers everything that happened, and they corroborated that it was self-defense, so I did not face any charges. However, this episode marked our lives completely, and both my girlfriend and I developed a kind of phobia of having neighbors. So after thinking about it for a while, we decided to move to a rural area of the state and bought a small house almost in the middle of the forest, far away from everyone. Here we have lived for the last year, and it has been the best decision we could have made. We finally feel safe and at peace. My family had lived in this house for over 2 years, and I had never spoken to my next-door neighbor. That day, I saw her through her window as she sat on her lawn, cross-legged and trying to concentrate on making a daisy chain. However, my mind wandered to the house next door, that old 19th century yellowish brick building. The house had a Victorian style that caught my eye, especially since most of the houses on the street were more modern and elegant. But that house, there was something off about it, something dark about it that gave me the creeps. Everyone was talking about Miss Wanda, the mysterious woman who lived there. There were rumors that she was over 100 years old, while others claimed that she was in fact a ghost, that she wasn't real at all. But despite hearing so many crazy stories about her, I never took them seriously. At first I thought the house was uninhabited, but one day coming home from school, I noticed the curtains moving, as if someone was behind them. That shadow made me think that the enigmatic Miss Wanda was real. A year passed after we moved in, and I still had my suspicions about the house. On the quieter nights, when the wind died down, I could hear strange moaning coming from the house next door. I thought about the possibility that it was a fox or a cat rummaging through the garbage, but those noises sounded all too human, and after listening to those strange sounds for several nights, I came to the conclusion that they were related to Miss Wanda. Not that I was sure, but every time I heard those moans, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe she was suffering, or maybe she couldn't go out because she was sick or bedridden. I was left wondering how a person could survive there for so long without going out to buy food. I mean, who was feeding her? Who was supplying her needs, because it was obvious that she never left that house. I went back to concentrating on my daisy chain, feeling the softness of the white petals between my fingers. Miss Wanda's figure became a mystery that intrigued me more and more, as if there was some secret that needed to be uncovered. I had seen a few boys approach her door and knock, but they never got an answer. I remember one day in particular when one of them ran out pale as a ghost, saying that the place was possessed by her spirit. The idea that something supernatural was connected to the house didn't seem far-fetched to me, given the gloomy atmosphere it harbored. I wondered if anyone would have the courage to go in and find out what was really going on within those walls. And sometimes I felt that there was a story there that needed to come to light. But who would dare to investigate? That house was a complete enigma. The image of life in my neighbor's house continued to haunt my curiosity. and that is because Mrs. Wanda's house was like an unopened book, full of blank pages that screamed to be read. From a distance, I felt that the dark building concealed many truths, and as the days passed, I realized that it was a mystery that slowly took over my mind. Who was Miss Wanda really? What secrets did her home hold? Maybe someday I would have to throw myself into the mystery and face my own fears. I don't know why, but there was something off about my neighbor. Her distant attitude, those strange moans coming from her house, it just didn't feel right. As I was thinking about this, at one point I pressed a daisy so hard in my hand that it broke, and seeing what I had done, I dropped it on the lawn and stretched a little, then looked at the house next door, and for a second, I could have sworn I saw an old, pale, haggard face peering out the window. But when I blinked, I only saw the beige curtains, which appeared to be more yellowish in color from the mildew. It must have been a play of light, I thought. That night, everything was quiet, almost too quiet. But around 1 o'clock in the morning, I heard the blissful wailing once again, that thing that would pull me out of my dreams and keep me up, sometimes all night long. Usually, once it started, it was almost impossible to go back to sleep, so I decided to get out of bed and walked over to the window, trying to see what was going on. There were no lights on in my neighbor's house, but the moon was clear and illuminated the outside, filling the garden with shadows. But why did I only hear these screams at night? Some said it was a vampire that only came out when it got dark, but come on, that was totally ridiculous. Vampires didn't exist, nor did ghosts or any of that supernatural nonsense my friends were always talking about. As I stared, I noticed the curtains on one of the windows upstairs moving. I froze. A pale, skeleton-like hand appeared and moved the curtain. It was as if Miss Wanda knew I was there, watching her. When she looked up and our gazes met, I felt a shiver run through my body. The image I had seen before was coming to life now. Her face was as if life had withdrawn from it. Her skin was sallow and wrinkled. She had an air of a wax image, and in her gaze, even in the gloom, I noticed a glow that echoed something deep and dark. My eyes were riveted on that image, and as I continued to stare as if hypnotized, she, with a long and disturbing smile, raised a bony finger and placed it over her lips as a gesture for me to be silent. I don't know why, but an icy fear ran through me from head to toe. Everything about her seemed unnatural. There was something sinister hovering around her, and when she finally let go of the curtain, she stumbled backwards into the darkness. In that instant, I knew she had seen me, that she had displayed herself for me, though I didn't understand what that meant. Terror haunted me that night in my dreams, as her finger lingered over her mouth, keeping me silent. A week later, the situation took an unexpected turn and everything I had suspected took shape. I don't know why or who did it, but someone called the emergency service because an ambulance was parked at our neighbor's house, and when the paramedics entered, they found Miss Wanda in her room. According to reports, she was nothing but a pile of bones. She was so decomposed that they said she had been dead for years. If that was true, then who was the figure that had been staring at me from the window that night? Confusion and fear swirled in my mind as that reality dawned on me. The house was full of dark secrets, and now I was left with more questions than answers. This mystery that had been haunting my daily life since we moved into this neighborhood was proving to be far more chilling than I had ever imagined.